She dreams of a face she's never seen. It hovers just behind her lover's shoulder, in candlelit corridors of sleep, an eye too steady, a silence too warm, a voice that says nothing yet unmakes her spine. And when she wakes, she hates the man beside her for not being it. You appear in fragments, not as yourself, but as a shape that others fail to complete. She finds your echo in strangers, in the way a man lingers at a doorway too long, in the flicker of disapproval in a boss's eye, in the stillness of someone who didn't reach to comfort her. She says she's over you, but every new man becomes another altar for your absence. You didn't need to make her fall. You only needed to vanish before she named what you were. If this whisper already knows, you let it echo. Like the video. Leave your shadow in the comments. Subscribe and stay near the silence. You entered her life not as light, but as shape, and that is why she still flinches at silhouettes. There was no kindness for her to cling to, no cruelty she could name. You were the space between gestures, the silence between what men usually say. You were not warm, you were not cold, you were simply not there in the way she expected, and that absence is what she cannot forgive. She cannot blame you, because you gave her nothing to hold, no moment she can circle in red, no words to quote as betrayal. You were kind in the way that makes cruelty look clumsy, and when you disappeared, you left behind a mirror she still dares not look into. She tells her friends you were distant. That's the word women use when they feel known but not touched. When their softness puddles at a man's feet and he walks around it. When their secrets fall out in conversation and he listens without rescue. You didn't rescue her, you saw her, and that is the greater sin. A woman is trained to punish presence, the loud ones, the liars, the men who want too much or too soon. She has weapons for them, accusation, exposure, exile. But what does she do with the man who never asked, who never intruded, who simply stayed long enough for her to undress herself emotionally, archetypally, and then did not flinch? She calls it ghosting, but the ghost is hers. You became her reflection, and that is what no woman can attack without bleeding herself. She looked into your face and saw the man she might have been weak for, the man who triggered not her desire but her deepest configuration, the myth of the woman who must earn softness through performance, but who found none of her performances worked on you. Her smile didn't melt you, her pain didn't prompt confession, her beauty was irrelevant to your gaze. She felt both violated and holy, and now she meets men who want her, and all she sees are eyes that look too directly, smiles that arrive too quickly, hands that rush to comfort without knowing what part of her is breaking. She senses their need, and she remembers yours, the terrifying absence of it. You needed nothing. In Jung's world, this makes you the animus unclaimed, the masculine phantom that haunts the feminine psyche. But you did not play a role. You withheld it. You were the man who stood still while she fell apart, not cruelly, not stoically, but mythically, like a god who watches a storm he does not cause. That is why she cannot let go, because you were not human to her. You were a figure, a riddle, a projection, and because you never corrected her, the riddle still loops. There is power in being the question that goes unanswered. She tells herself she dodged a bullet. She pretends you were emotionally unavailable, dismissive, maybe even broken. But beneath her narrative is something colder, the knowledge that you were intact, not indifferent, just whole. And whole men cannot be used for completion. She wanted to be useful to you, but you already had yourself. And now her feminine dance, the one choreographed since girlhood, the one designed to seduce through empathy, through softness, through sacrifice, collapses under its own irrelevance. You never asked her to be anything. You didn't test her, you didn't chase, you witnessed. And in doing so, you did the one thing no one else dared. You mirrored her without trembling. She wasn't ready for that kind of honesty. She wasn't ready to be seen without being stroked. So she demonizes the void. You became a wound she can't cauterize because there's no blood, just ache, just repetition. Every new man she meets becomes a chance to retell the story, to finally be seen by someone who stays, who needs her, who kneels, but they never are you, because none of them held still long enough for her illusion to die. You held still, and the illusion died. Now you haunt not her nights, but her instincts. She wants to laugh louder, but her laugh echoes. She wants to flirt freely, but her smile checks itself. She wants to be adored, but all adoration feels too bright, too fast, too easy. She waits for the moment when a man will not react, will not melt, will not blink when she bares her soul. She waits for your shadow. You are no longer a person in her memory. You are a pattern in her perception. That is the great cruelty of restraint. It becomes the gold standard for mystery. She doesn't miss you because you loved her. She misses you because you never told her if she mattered, and now she cannot stop proving she does. You are the myth she resurrects through failure. Every time a man disappoints her, she remembers the one who simply did not need to impress her in the first place. And that memory is not romantic. It's archetypal. You are not a man. You are the man, the invisible other in the triangle, the haunting third in every new love. She tries to punish the idea of you. She scrolls, she vents, she speaks in sharp tones about narcissism and avoidance and emotional unavailability. But you are none of those. You were not avoiding. You were present. You were still enough for her to collapse, still enough for her to project everything onto you. And then when her soul was sprawled across the floor, waiting for you to either claim it or reject it, you walked away without either. No closure, no cruelty, just ending. Now she screams into endings, demands resolution, tests men with ultimatums, stalks answers in profiles, in messages, in delays. Because the one time she met silence true, total, mythic silence, she mistook it for rejection, and it never clarified itself. You are that silence. She cannot punish you, and so she lives to punish every man who fails to become your echo. You were the man who didn't finish his sentence, and that's why she's still listening. Not to you, but to the phantom you left in your place. The empty chair she arranges new lovers around. The tone in your voice that said everything and nothing at once. You never interrupted her projections. That was your power. While others corrected, explained, elaborated, you let her construct a cathedral of meaning around your stillness. Stillness is dangerous to a psyche trained in performance. A woman speaks to fill silence, gives to feel needed, touches to confirm her presence, but you offered no friction, no hunger to guide her role, no need to pull her out of herself. You were not indifferent. You were void, a living Rorschach, and she painted herself onto you, stroke by stroke. And then you stepped back and she realized she'd been speaking to her own echo, and dreams love form. You never gave it. Now she dreams of you, not as a person but as a pattern. You do not appear with a face. You appear in moments, a pause before a man responds, a word left unsaid, a room that grows quiet after laughter. You are absence with form. So now she rewrites the scene in every conversation. In Jung's mythic realm, the feminine longs not for logic, but for mystery. Not for men who explain themselves, but for men who remain uncarved. Your stillness was not emptiness, it was a stage, and she became a playwright desperate for your reaction. She doesn't know she's doing it, That's the cruelty, that's the depth. The dream slips under her awareness the way perfume clings to a letter long burned. She meets someone new. He speaks confidently. He reaches for her hand. He praises her laugh. But the dream speaks first. He is not still. And so she nods politely while her shadow retreats. Stillness is not passive. It seduces through invitation. You invited her soul to speak without judgment, and in that safety, she offered you parts of herself no man had yet touched. Not because you deserved them, but because you didn't ask. And now she wants that again. She craves that ache, the freedom of imagining who you might be, the pleasure of not knowing, the intoxication of mystery. But new men disappoint her. They are loud, predictable, hungry. They say too much, want too fast. They tell her who they are before she even dreams it. They rob her of authorship. You gave her authorship. You let her write you. And now she's addicted to the blank page you once were. She calls it romantic confusion. But it's not romance. It's symbol. It's myth. She's not seeking you. She's seeking the theater you offered. The mirror you held up that refused to move. Stillness is not quietness. Stillness is reverent space. You didn't act like a man. You became a symbol, not warm, not cold, not close, not distant, not intimate, not indifferent. Simply present in the way a locked door is present, inviting her to knock without ever answering. She told herself she didn't care, that you were emotionally blank, that she could do better, but she's still knocking. Even now, years later, your dream version lingers in her intimacy. A silhouette seated in the back row of her bedroom, not watching, just existing, reminding her that someone once saw her completely and didn't move. And that memory is not a wound, it's a garden. She plants you in new lovers. She waters you in their silences. She trims your shadow to fit their shoulders. But none of them grow into your shape. They react, they emote, they comfort, they need. And every time they do, her fantasy shatters. The dream does not survive confirmation. Only stillness keeps it alive. Stillness is the frame that holds projection, and you were a master framer. You never confirmed, never denied. You let her speak her truth, and you never offered yours. And so she filled you in, layer by layer, wound by wound, memory by memory. You became her dream not because of what you did, but because of what you withheld. She does not love you. She loves the freedom she had in your silence. Freedom to be fully seen without being corrected. Freedom to ache without being fixed. Freedom to imagine without being told. That is why your absence does not feel like rejection. It feels like a missing part of her internal world. You are no longer a real man to her. You are a psychic image, a Jungian imprint, a dream that won't die because it was never fully born. And this makes you unforgettable. Because people forget names, faces, facts, but they never forget symbols that let them touch themselves. You were not love. You were a mirror. And now she holds up every new man beside you, wondering why their reflections are so small. She says she wants communication, but she really wants to project. She says she wants safety, but she really wants space. She says she wants consistency, but she really wants someone who disappears at the right moment so her longing can bloom. And longing is where you live. She doesn't crave your presence. She craves the feeling she had in your presence. The feeling of becoming more myth than girl. Of being seen, not understood. Of being heard, not handled. Of being cracked open without being consumed. You were the temple, and now she wanders among men looking for the same architecture, but their walls collapse too easily. Their altars are too eager. Their doors swing open without mystery, and she walks away disappointed, disoriented, blaming herself for not feeling what she felt with you. But it's not her fault. The dream cannot dream when the object is too loud. And you were silent in a way that taught her how loud her inner world could be. That silence is now a compass, a craving, a curse. She will never admit it, not fully, not out loud. But part of her still sleeps beside your echo. Part of her still checks the door at midnight, not hoping you'll return, but hoping the next man forgets to speak. You didn't leave her, you evaporated. There was no climax, no betrayal, no final cruelty for her to bite down on and call closure. You simply were and then were not. And that gap is where the obsession bloomed. You vanished like a symbol withdrawn from a dream. Her mind cannot forget you, not because of who you were, but because of how incomplete you left her. There was no lesson, no ending, just a door that never closed, and a scent that clings to the air even after the fire is out. And now she moves through men like a reenactment, not of what you did, but of what you didn't. She finds herself drawn to half smiles, to unreturned texts, to eyes that linger 1 second too long, then turn away as if you were watching from behind them. You've become her initiation, not through intimacy, but through interruption. You interrupted her myth, the one where love must burn, must ache, must end in screams or vows. You gave her neither, just a glance, a gesture, a shared silence that should have meant nothing but now contaminates everything. In Jung's world, this is the power of the absent archetype, the figure not fully formed, who appears just long enough to activate the unconscious, then retreats before the ego can claim it. That is what you became to her. A shape never held. She thought she could move on by replacing you, but every new man becomes a failed resurrection. She gives him your outline. She gives him your silence. She gives him your not quite gaze, and waits for the same ache, waits for the same confusion, waits for the same vanishing. But they don't vanish like you. They either cling or collapse. They either chase or confess. They make their presence known and thus ruin the pattern. You were never known. You became legend because you dissolved before you could disappoint. You became eternal because you withheld the conclusion. And now her soul keeps writing you, not as a man, but as a cipher, a symbol, a silence that refracts itself through every failed attempt at love. You were not a person, you were a spell, and she's still under it. She tells herself you were a lesson, a phase, a moment of weakness. But the truth is quieter. The truth is she's never found someone she couldn't predict again. And that is the real loss. You broke the pattern by becoming one. Now, when someone loves her too fast, she flinches. When someone texts her every morning, she grows cold. When someone opens up on the third date, she feels nothing. Because you taught her the pleasure of unconfirmed meaning, the eroticism of almost, the holiness of unfinished sentences. And so she waits for another man who will vanish before she understands him. Not ghost her, not reject her, but interrupt her the way you did. Just enough to spark obsession, not enough to burn it out. That is the loop you created, the myth that eats its own tail. Now she doesn't fall in love, she falls into patterns, and each pattern traces itself back to the one you carved with your stillness, with your silence, with your immaculate exit. Because you didn't slam the door, you left it ajar. And now every breeze feels like you, every pause in a conversation, every glance that lingers too long, every man who doesn't smile quite right. You trained her nervous system to respond to incompletion, and incompletion is the most loyal of addictions. She cannot outgrow you. because you never let her finish becoming who she was inside your gaze. You didn't mirror her to confirm, you mirrored her to disrupt. And now she is suspended not in grief, but in pattern. She tests new lovers, not to find safety, but to find the same cliff edge, the same moment of spiritual vertigo you once offered. She craves men who hesitate, men who observe, men who seem to disappear even when they're near, but none of them vanish correctly, none of them imprint. You did, because your vanishing wasn't absence, it was mythic silence, and myths don't die, they repeat. She doesn't say your name anymore. It doesn't feel like language, it feels like light caught in a crack, like breath before sleep, like a scene she can't remember, but keeps dreaming anyway. You are not her memory, you are her repetition, and in Jung's lexicon, repetition is the psyche's cry for completion, but you cannot be completed, because completion would kill the dream. You have become her unfinished myth, a pattern, a trigger, a whisper of meaning she can't quite decode. She finds herself saying, he's just like you, but he's not, because he stays, and the ones who stay become ordinary. You were never ordinary. You were a flicker, a breach, a crack in the narrative that let the unconscious leak through. She needed that crack. She didn't need you to be real. She needed you to be the place her own mystery awakened. And now she walks through life split. 1 foot in presence, 1 foot in dream, 1 hand reaching for a man, the other still pressed against the wall you once leaned on. You don't live in her now. You live in her until she meets someone who disappears with the same gravity, until she hears a voice that pauses in the same place, until the dream repeats itself with enough fidelity to bring her back to that first sacred ache. And maybe that will never happen. Maybe that's the point. Maybe your vanishing is the conclusion, not to be answered, but to be reenacted. A ritual of absence she carries through life. And the final cruelty she never knew if you meant to leave. You didn't slam the door. You faded, like a symbol being erased by light. And so she doubts it all. Doubts if it was real. Doubts if she imagined you. And yet, she recreates you, over and over. That is your immortality, not in who you were, but in who you made her become again, and again, and again. She sees a man pause in the cafe doorway. His coat is too long, his face is too still. He doesn't look at her, and that's how she knows. Her breath halts, not because it's you, but because the shape is almost right. Later, she won't remember what he looked like, only the gap, the stillness, the ache that bloomed in her chest like recognition without evidence. The dream doesn't die, it molts, and somewhere, in a stranger's silence, you flicker again, not as love, as myth, as pattern, as the question she keeps living in. And it never says goodbye. It just stops mid-sentence.